I started covering the world of electric vehicles, it was pretty much a given that big auto sucked. Big legacy automakers were very much against bringing EVs to the mass market. At the time, while GM, Ford, Honda, Toyota and several other automakers had either recently sold or leased electric vehicles for select markets in the US, and in Europe, Citroën and Peugeot were among the legacy brands building and selling EVs for the European market, pretty much every automaker had done so under duress. If you're watching this video, you probably already know what happened in the early noughties when the majority of those automakers, led primarily by Toyota and GM, worked to have California's zero-emission mandate eradicated, also that they were no longer required to produce and sell EVs. I'm sure many of you are already familiar with what happened next. GM, Honda and Toyota, and to some extent a few other brands as well, took back perfectly functioning vehicles from customers at the end of their lease periods, and they crushed them. Well, one of the reasons given for crushing those vehicles, that said vehicles were technically prototypes and insurance companies wouldn't have allowed them to stay on the road after their initial lease period, it's long been treated as something of a thinly veiled excuse, although it has been used multiple times since then with other limited production vehicles like the BMW Mini E and Active E prototypes. And regardless of what the reasons were, I think it's pretty easy to see that, the majority of those automakers really were just making excuses and did not want to see the EVs on the road because even then, EVs had a significant following that distracted from the cars that automakers could make a killing on. ICE vehicles. Killing. To this day, the actions of those legacy automakers more than 20 years ago, as well as the various comments made by automaker executives since then, have put a sizable portion of EV fans completely off buying electric vehicles made by legacy automakers, and for many, many years now, dyed-in-the-wool EV fans have maintained that if you want an EV, you have to buy one from a non-legacy automaker to truly support the EV movement. That EVs made by legacy automakers are clunky, flawed, and built on outdated technology. And some of the people regularly making their voices heard in our comments section agree, accusing myself, Kate, and the rest of the team of all manner of mean and nasty things because we dare cover the industry as a whole, not just EV-only brands. We've even been accused of taking legacy automaker money to dismiss certain EV brands, to the very point that some very conspiratorial commenters say that we should be investigated by the DOJ, which is laughable at best, and at worst, I also want to know where those blank checks have been headed to, because they're certainly not heading to us. Which, by the way, is a fantastic time to remind you that we can only do what we do because of you guys. If you are not already a Patreon supporter, please consider it. Or maybe buy us some swag. Or put us on your YouTube member list. It all helps. Much better than those random blank checks that never actually arrive. So, today, I'm going to ask if, in 2024, there's a difference between legacy-built EVs and EVs built by companies who only produce electric vehicles. I'm going to ask if some of those old stereotypes still exist and look at how some legacy automakers are leveraging the benefits of being an established legacy firm while also following practices that traditionally, at least, have been attributed to EV-only firms and startups. And you'll note that while, at one point, not so long ago, all dedicated EV firms were classified as startups, Tesla's incredible transition from a startup to a mainstream brand means that we all really need to evolve our language to take those successes into account. So, we have. Let's get on with it. Despite what you may have heard, or in fact what you may have previously held to be true, there's no simple answer when it comes to if legacy or dedicated EV firms are the best at making electric vehicles. At one point, the answer to that question was very clear-cut and more easily expressed, but as time has passed, and both companies and the people who run those companies have changed, the answer to that question is becoming less and less clear. And while it's incredibly important to acknowledge the past and its impact on the present, and to some extent the future, it's also incredibly important to make sure that we all remember that people and the companies they run can change. Sometimes, I will admit, that rate of change is frankly glacial. But if we ignore the possibility of change and get stuck in stereotypes that are 2 decades old, we risk living in the EV past. Sticking with outdated views and assumptions of automotive brands that are decades old is, frankly, no better for EV mass adoption than maintaining Axis powers from World War II still doing the things they were doing 80 years ago.
Whistle while you work, Hitler is at work. He's half army, so's his army, whistle while you...
Your name will also go on the list. What is it?
Don't tell him, Pike.
Pike.
Even if you do have a very them versus us opinion of the automotive industry, I really hope you'll continue to watch because, as I am about to explain, there's really very little room for black and white thinking on this particular subject. The too long didn't read is that companies that have been built from the ground up to be EV companies get to benefit from not having decades of suck, squeeze, bang, blow and years of overcomplicated corporate structures to get around. They're more agile, more ready and able to adapt to change, and are more able to think more readily outside of the box. At the same time, legacy automakers turning their attention to EVs have a larger parts bin to pull from, a wider range of established industry connections to leverage, and more chances of bringing a vehicle to mass market on time and on budget. But they often have to fight their own battles internally, not with funding restrictions as startups and dedicated EV firms often do, but with long-time board members who remain unconvinced about the future of EVs. Let's start by looking at dedicated EV firms, be it a startup or a more established brand. And to keep things on track as possible, I'm going to focus primarily on areas where each excel. History first. For people who have been driving EVs for a long time, it's often a massive plus that a company they are supporting has nothing to do with the truly horrendous amounts of pollution that the auto industry has been responsible for, or indeed still continues to be responsible for. And for a company to be supported that has not partaken in past negative actions against EVs is a really big bonus, especially for those who were there back in the early noughties when their cars are being taken away and crushed. That same fact is a massive draw for those who are still concerned about the impact that those legacy brands have on the planet today. And there's a lot to be said from an ethical consumerism side to opt for a brand new company with no ties to legacy auto. But as Kate noted in a video a few years ago on ethical consumerism, it is really freaking hard to be a good ethical consumer. And I'm not going to replay the scene from The Good Place to bash that point home that she did, but if you haven't watched her video, or in fact the series The Good Place, you should watch both. Next, tech. For the most part, EV-only firms tend to have the edge on legacy automakers when it comes to onboard tech and computer hardware. That's primarily because for a really long time, anyone who worked in the EV industry, in EV startups specifically, tended to have a background in the tech industry first and auto industry second. Developmental cycles of many EV startups have focused on computer hardware and software first and foremost, with traditional software-driven and tech-focused development cycles. Agile methodologies and the short development cycles that those call for make for quick, iterative development, and we've seen that reflected in vehicle over-the-air software updates. In fact, it's pretty much agreed that Tesla dragged the entire auto industry, sometimes kicking and screaming, towards making over-the-air software updates the de facto norm for all new cars. That has come with some pluses and some negatives. The latter, that we are all too often seeing customers beta test software, which, while some customers are all about that, I'm part of the Ford Early Access program, but which also frustrate and confuse customers who are not tech savvy and would rather that software gets pushed when it's only 100% ready, and that things don't randomly change. And that's not always the case for many startups and EV-only brands. For the most part, EV-only and startup companies are winning in the software development and OTA world, but I am starting to see that change in some ways. I'll mention that at the end of the video. Next, let's look at the rate of innovation. Traditionally speaking, startups have been more agile and able to innovate in out-of-the-box ways down to multiple different things. There's, of course, the old phrase, necessity is the mother of invention. And for all manner of startups, both in and out of the auto industry, there is a massive drive towards efficiency of development and resources, which is often, but not always, caused by very tight budgets and very tight purse strings. Then there's the fact that the physical size of a startup is far smaller than a larger established brand, meaning an idea or a product generally has to go through fewer stages of bureaucratic management approval before it's released to the public. That can sometimes give said company an edge, as it can respond more quickly to issues and get products out of the door a little more quickly, especially if we're talking about products that heavily lean on software. But at the same time, it can sometimes lead to development cycles and products that aren't given the greater big picture view, which can lead customers and sometimes even staff completely out of the loop. To be 100% clear here, we need to acknowledge that how quickly a company iterates and releases fixes does depend greatly on the experience of the team, how well the team fits together as a whole, and how the management of that team is carried out. Good software is as much about team leadership and how much support is given to the devs as it is about good hardware or killer features. And that has very little to do with the age of the company or how the company fits into the marketplace. This flexibility of development, speed of iteration, and high pressure to always be delivering yesterday can also cause problems outside of software, which is where I'm heading next, nuts and bolts of construction. Not only do legacy automakers have a greater pool of experience when it comes to understanding vehicle dynamics, chassis, and things like steering and brakes, but it's also more likely that they can leverage larger and better equipped development teams to build prototypes, engage in extensive testing, and head towards production. Large legacy automakers are more likely to have ranges of diverse test tracks and test facilities, often that they own themselves and operate. The Porsche Taycan, for example, is frankly one of the best handling EVs out there today, not because Porsche is a king of electric vehicles, but because Porsche's chassis team is legendary. And while startups and EV-only firms might hire in the best possible talent from a massive pool of auto industry professionals with promises of blank page designs and more freedom for engineering teams, every single performance EV that I've driven that was engineered or developed by a legacy automaker in collaboration with an associated team known for racetrack prowess or legendary badge engineering has been phenomenal. The Porsche Taycan, the Kia EV6 GT, and the Mercedes-Benz AMG EQE SUV all showcase decades of experience and knowledge that went into refining and tweaking those vehicles' road manners. And yes, while some of this is no doubt because these companies are building EVs to cross-shop against the dominant leader in the marketplace right now, Tesla, the results are truly impressive. But beware, because sometimes legacy automakers are caught up on old ideas and old, stale platforms. Frankly, with only a handful of exceptions, EVs built by legacy automakers on a platform that wasn't designed from the ground up as a dedicated EV platform, or rather a platform that was designed to accommodate EV drivetrains from the get-go, in addition to other drivetrain types, tend to be a bit pants. Sometimes you will find a diamond in the metaphorical dirt, but usually, if it's not built on a dedicated brand new EV-only platform, it's no good. When it comes to development cycles, I can see positive and negative sides for both legacy and dedicated EV companies. The former get to use the proceeds from making gas guzzlers to help fund EV development, and the latter tend to use hype and pre-orders to fund development. But while the former does tend to have more free cash flow and thus a more predictable development cycle in which you're less likely to hear about the vehicle until it's nearly ready to launch, EV-only firms and startups get to ride the hype machine and benefit from pre-orders. At the same time, though, you're more likely to see developmental delays and product launches pushed back when you deal with EV-only companies, especially when its leadership has a tendency to overpromise. Tesla first unveiled its second-generation Roadster back in 2017, and we're still waiting for it to enter into production. At one point, the reborn Aptera, not to be confused the original company of the same name, said it would be producing and selling its solar electric cars in 2022. It's now 2024, and if we are lucky, we might, maybe, see limited production begin before the end of this year. The other area that legacy automakers tend to have an edge on over dedicated EV companies is its buying power, as in parts and supplies. Legacy automakers already have established relationships with parts suppliers and can often order parts for a new vehicle in volumes that are multiple orders of magnitude larger than any startup or small EV-only company could physically manage. And I've spoken with multiple startups over the years where I've heard off the record, either from company leadership or engineers, how difficult it is to get many big name tier 1 part suppliers to play ball. Sure, your brand new EV might have several $1 million in pre-order reservations and you might even have a production facility half finished. But if you're not planning on making hundreds of thousands of vehicles in your first year, your preferred parts supplier might just laugh in your face and tell you to sod off. That either comes in the form of them either refusing to work with you at all or making the parts so expensive you can't afford them. Either way, that results in increased costs, which you either then have to eat up and increase your losses or put prices up for your end customers. Next, let's talk about loyalty and hype. It's something that startups and EV-only companies have in buckets, because they're often portrayed as the little guys taking on the evil corporations of the auto industry, and because they tend to lean into community more than legacy auto, I would argue that customers and fans of those particular companies tend to be more loyal and more vocal than those of traditional legacy automakers. That said, it's not always the case. You only have to look at the loyalty surrounding the various different truck brands in the US. But in the EV world, dedicated EV companies and EV startups tend to command a more loyal fan base and are more forgiving of issues than legacy automakers. That also means said fans and customers are less likely to storm off if things aren't 100% right. The true believer mentality has served companies like Tesla and Rivian phenomenally well over the years, and I genuinely believe that these are the things that have allowed Tesla to do some of the things it's done in recent years that would otherwise have caused an exodus of customers were it not for the fact that it's seen by many still as the plucky startup that wants to change the world. Even if that veneer is now starting to slip off more and more. Hype sells, and it's something that an EV-only firm has on legacy auto in a massive way. And it's something that legacy automakers are actually trying to capitalize on in their own way. We're seeing more and more automakers switch, for example, from giving automotive journalists fairly open and unfettered access to new vehicles to following in the tire tracks of Tesla and new EV startups by only granting access to individuals that the brand knows will be favourable to the vehicle. But while legacy automakers are now employing the same advertising and journalist relationship tactics as smaller and newer EV-only firms, as well as leveraging waiting lists and generating social media hype, it also means that when a legacy automaker screws up with software, which they do, that veneer slips off, and we all too often see that those automakers have no way and no idea of how to deal with customers in a way that customers actually find helpful. As much as I really like the Ford F-150 Lightning as a versatile, usable work truck, which is why I purchased mine, I am often infuriated by the slowness with which Ford rolls out software updates, the seeming lack of clarity in which those updates are pushed, and the vastness of an organisation which means all too often bugs and flaws take forever to fix. The next thing that's by far and away one of the most reassuring things that about buying a legacy-made EV is after-sales service, because legacy automakers already have their sales and service network established and, for the most part, make their factory manuals and tools available for a fee so that you can work on your own vehicle. I can order a part for my F-150 Lightning or my Chevrolet Bolt EV, and it arrives at the dealership very often the very next day. When we hit a deer with our Chevrolet Bolt, the local Chevy-approved body shop was able to get that car fixed and back on our driveway in pretty short order. And when we had an issue with the ABS system on one of our cars, it was in the shop and fixed in 48 hours. Even my aged Toyota RAV4 EV, the first generation one, which was already long out of production when I needed a replacement windscreen, had enough of a parts chain remaining that my local windscreen specialist was not only able to source and install an OEM heated windscreen for my car, but it did it in just 3 days. Of course, I'd be failing here in my duty if I pretended that that was always the case. I know people with older EVs, cars like the Fiat 500e and Chevrolet Spark EV that were never made in massive numbers, now genuinely worry about getting spare parts and service. Some have found that their local dealerships have suddenly stopped working on the particular car they own because nobody is trained on staff anymore. And I've heard some horror stories about vehicles that have been in the shop for months, waiting for back-ordered or no longer easily accessible spare parts. At the end of the day, which is better? Well, it kind of depends on you. If you want cutting-edge technology on which you may occasionally get burned, if you want to stick it to big auto for screwing up the planet, and if you want to say you own an EV that's made by a brand that has never had any connection to big oil, and you're okay with longer than expected wait lists for new vehicles or repairs, then you should go with a dedicated company. If you want to know your vehicle will be supported for many years into the future, don't want to have to wait around in general for parts and spares, and you're wanting something a little more conventional and drives like it's been engineered with decades of experience behind it, then I would suggest you might want to go for an EV made by a legacy automaker. I know some people will say that is the ultimate sin, and that rewarding a legacy automaker is wrong when it still produces gas guzzlers. But I'm going to counter with this. If you are buying an EV from a legacy automaker that fits your needs and encourages said automaker to continue to make EVs, and that EV suits your needs better than an EV from a non-legacy automaker, I think you're ultimately making the best choice. At the end of the day, everyone has different needs and requirements, and we'd all be incredibly boring if we all purchased the same vehicle. Personally, I've owned small volume EVs from startups and quirky specialist brands, and I've owned mainstream EVs that have been made by legacy automakers. Frankly, fuel type trumps brand, along with it obviously meeting your needs. To finish though, I want to throw a bone to companies like Polestar and Skunkworks that are now growing up at companies like Ford. By allowing companies to spin off its EV engineering team into separate Skunkworks-like units or startups, legacy automakers are allowing their EV teams to behave like a startup, to experience the flexibility and freedom of small teams, to allow them to be agile and to respond to change, and also, of course, to cash in, at least sometimes, on investor funds for the same, all while simultaneously retaining the years of industry knowledge, the parts catalogue, and the business-to-business the parts catalogues and the business-to-business relationships and potential dealer networks. I think, at the end of the day, that might actually be the ultimate best of both worlds. But that's my opinion. What say you? Thanks for joining me today, and if you've got thoughts, make sure you leave them below in our Discord chat room, or you can reach out to us on Mastodon. Thanks to the amazing list of people scrolling by on your screen right now. They are some of the more than 1,500 people that help make this channel possible by funding it through Patreon and YouTube, covering our bills, paying our team, and making sure we can be 100% independent. If you'd like to join them and see your name listed here, just follow the links below. There are a range of different tiers you can sign up for, from as little as $1 a month, or if you pay yearly, $10.08 a year. A massive welcome to our newest supporters, Ralph Koenig, Mr. Eldritch, Dwayne Adiger, and Corey Singletray. To join our list and get your shout out, become a paid Patreon member for your week of fame. If you'd like to support us with a one-off donation, you'll also find links below to make Ko-fi and Bitcoin donations, and we even have an old-fashioned PO box you can reach us at. The address is listed below. And of course, if you're in need of some swag, you'll find our swag store link in the down below as well. This month, we are celebrating Wrangling EV FUD with a fantastic t-shirt design by our in-house artist and animator, Erin. Get yours today by heading to our Redbubble store. We've got some great content coming up, so make sure you're subscribed on PeerTube or YouTube, and we'll see you soon. We make new videos every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. If you want more, the mighty algorithm thinks you'll like this video, but we also think that this one is well worth a look. See you soon, and as always, keep evolving.